Hello! 1990 New York. Organized crime is reigning over the city. The city government is riddled with corruption and doesn't work for the benefit of the people. Over the past 10 years, poor neighborhoods in particular suffered from their houses being bought up for next to nothing, with the remaining residents driven out. The empty buildings were then burned down with the help of local gangs for insurance money. South Bronx was hit the hardest and looked like a European city after a World War II bombing. This is the neighborhood Frank White grew up in. Throughout his life, he has seen a lot, and in particular, the darkest manifestations of human nature. To survive, he had become one of those who turns chaos into order. However, he does it according to his own rules, which bear little resemblance to the penal code.
Whoa!
The man isn't willing to share power, but is quite generous with his associates. But who is he? A ruthless criminal and a blight on society? Or a strong, noble man who knows his place in this world? Frank White leaves the cell where he spent the last 8 years of his life. His sentence in the legendary high-security prison Sing Sing has come to an end. On his way out, the man is immediately greeted by a black limousine. In the past, Frank was a powerful mobster who created his own underground empire in New York. While he was away, much has changed, and now others use the fruits of his labors. It's time to reclaim what is rightfully his. At this time, in a posh New York apartment, Colombian drug lord Emilio El Zappa is having fun with the ladies. He goes outside with a suitcase in his hands and enters a phone booth. Here, the man gets surrounded by 3 gangsters with shotguns. They shoot him at point-blank range and wave a newspaper in his face. On the front page is a report on Frank White's release. The man himself continues to ride the limousine along the streets, where girls of easy virtue offer their services and push illicit goods. This is the neighborhood that Frank grew up in. The man is upset that total devastation reigns here now. Inside the car with him are 2 girls, dark-skinned Ray and a leggy blonde Melanie. They are simultaneously his lovers and bodyguards. They're heading into Manhattan over the Queensboro Bridge. Meanwhile, an illegal deal is taking place at a hotel near the airport. Jimmy Jump is negotiating the purchase of a large shipment with King Tito, another Colombian trader. Jump's assistant, nicknamed Test Tube, carefully examines the white powder. Jimmy starts to get nervous.
It's gonna take a few minutes, all right?
We ain't got a few minutes, man. We got to get busy.
To calm him down, the guy gives his partner some of the substance. This makes him even more talkative and insolent. This irritates King Tito and his patience snaps. The Colombian demands they pick up the goods as soon as possible and pay an additional 10% for transportation costs. This is his final word. The buyer isn't happy, but eventually agrees. He puts a suitcase on the table, but inside, instead of cash, there are only feminine hygiene products. Jimmy explains that they'll come in handy for plugging gunshot wounds and empties a clip into Tito. Test Tube and his partner help finish off the guards in the hallway. The gang leaves with their loot. Meanwhile, Frank is enjoying a hot shower in the presidential suite at the Plaza Hotel. His new abode is nothing like a jail cell. Melanie reloads his gun and Ray tenderly kisses the boss. Afterwards, Jimmy Jump and his boys show up in the suite. They're the ones who shot Emilio. The situation is tense, as all the gangsters are armed. But suddenly, Frank performs their signature greeting dance, and everyone runs to hug the boss upon his return. Loyal friends and associates report on the cleanup of the territory from the Colombians. Years in prison haven't put White on the straight and narrow.
I feel no remorse. Yo, it's a terrible thing.
He is given Tito's gloves and a suitcase full of Emilio's money. Frank is very pleased. He's going to meet with a lawyer, D'Alessio, and his team of attorneys. The man invites Jim to come with him. The gangster refuses. He hates the pretentious guy and would rather go have some fun. In parting, Frank asks why Jump has never visited him in prison. The tension rises again. The man replies that he didn't want to see his boss in a cage. This response proves appropriate, and the gang leaves. Frank puts on Tito's leather gloves and celebrates his first triumph in so many years. Together with Ray and Melanie, he goes to an expensive restaurant where the mobster is warmly welcomed by politicians and the district judge. These people clearly contributed to the criminal's release. Frank walks over to D'Alessio's table. He's glad to see an old acquaintance here, a female lawyer named Jennifer. Everyone is interested in the boss's plans. He assures them that he is reformed and is going to run for mayor of New York. His words are taken as a joke, but there's clearly a lot of truth in it. He may not become the mayor officially, but he will hold the power over the city nonetheless. As his next move, he asks D'Alessio to schedule a meeting with Italian mafia boss Artie Clay. The lawyer replies that the man conducts business like a wild animal and will not want to see Frank. White insists that his message is delivered. D'Alessio goes to the Italians and relays the business proposal. Artie rudely sends White to hell and urinates on the messenger's shoes. Meanwhile, Frank invites Jennifer for a ride on the night subway. Although the woman realizes that the mobster's place is in prison, she can't resist his charm. They get private in an empty train car, and she confesses that she missed the man. Suddenly, 3 young thugs disturb their peace, trying to rob them. One of them snatches Jennifer's bag, to which White reveals the gun at his waist. The petty hooligans immediately drop their trophy, backing away. However, Frank doesn't plan on killing them. On the contrary, he throws them a stack of money and offers to cooperate. All they have to do is ask to meet White at the Plaza Hotel. Afterwards, Frank and his gang visit the Italians. The mobsters are playing cards as usual. The guest has received a message from Artie and wants to join the game of blackjack. He puts everything he has on the line.
From here on, nothing goes down unless I'm involved. No blackjack, no dope deals, no nothing.
From now on, everyone has to pay Frank a portion of their profits, and it's not up for discussion. White is about to leave when Clay hurls loud insults and threats at him. In response, Frank immediately fires several bullets into him, continuing to fire at the corpse. He announces to Artie's henchmen that they are invited to work for him on better terms. Several of the men immediately leave with him. Following White's release, the police developed a plan to put him under surveillance and prevent him from committing new crimes. Detective Bishop examines the file of the mobster, who has already been caught many times red-handed. His last conviction was for dealing illegal substances. The policeman constantly takes painkillers to cope with the unpleasant sensations. Meanwhile, Frank himself goes to the theater with his crew. They're watching a contemporary play, and the man is clearly not in the mood. He's not here for entertainment. There are powerful politicians sitting in the audience, and Frank asks a city councilman to fix a problem in his neighborhood. A hospital in the South Bronx isn't getting enough funding. The official explains that the budget is empty, and there's nowhere to get the money from. If Frank is so eager to do a good deed, he can donate from his own pocket.
Maybe I will.
Okay. How about 16 million by the end of the quarter?
That's a hefty sum that the mobster doesn't have, but that only encourages Frank, and he vows to find the money. His legal advisor tells him to stay out of politics, but White is adamant. Hospitals shouldn't be reserved only for rich neighborhoods. Frank is then surrounded by Detective Bishop and his partners, the red-haired Irishman Gilly and the dark-skinned Flanagan. Their department is in charge of combating the distribution of illegal substances. The boss is not happy about the encounter, but the cops take him away for a talk anyway and put him in the car. The lawyer protests because this is an abuse of power, but they merely invite him to follow them to the station. But in the next second, the cops turn on their blinkers and rush down the oncoming traffic to throw off the tail. They arrive at a secluded spot and open their trunk in front of Frank. Inside lies Emilio's body. Realizing that the mobster is the only one who could have ordered to kill the Colombian, the cops demand a confession from him. The spree of murders suspiciously coincides with White's release from prison. Of course, Frank's not going to make their job any easier. They don't have any proof of his involvement, and they never will. Enraged, Flanagan raises his hand against the thug. The gangster responds with a hail of blows. Gilly threatens him with a gun and pulls Frank away. Bishop orders his subordinates to get in the car before they cause any more trouble. He warns White that if he continues his shady business, his gang will meet a swift and tragic end. They won't let him out of their sight. The cops drive off, leaving Frank to find his way home. Soon, all 3 cops attend a loud Irish wedding. Gilly banters with Flanagan. He also wishes the newlyweds that their children never become cops. While everyone is drinking and partying, the workaholic Bishop leaves for work. He won't let Frank outsmart him. Ignoring the cops' warnings, Frank sends D'Alessio to Chinatown. At the movie theater, the middleman meets Larry Wong, the boss of the local Chinese gang. He isn't happy about White's return either, as he was making excellent money without him. The smuggler has 220 pounds of goods, worth $15 million. White doesn't have enough money to buy such a large shipment, but the arrogant Wong knows about Artie Clay's death. He says he's not as stupid as the Italian, so the man agrees to meet with Frank and discuss the terms of their cooperation. The next day, Jimmy and his guys are driving around town. In a great mood, he goes into a cafe for a meal. Inside, there's a grandma and her 3 grandchildren who are in need of money. Jump generously gives them some, and the kids run off to spend the coins on arcade games. While he's distracted and waiting for his order, his gang gets arrested by Bishop's men outside. Jump is the last to be surrounded. He's charged with the murder of the Colombians. This time, they have not only the evidence, but a living witness. One of Tito's guards has survived and testified against them. Gilly and Flanagan taunt the thugs who made a stupid mistake. Meanwhile, Frank meets Wong at the very hospital he's trying to save from bankruptcy. A nurse walks them through a pediatric ward which they will be forced to close. The men step aside. Larry wants to sell all the product in bulk, but Frank promises him to multiply his earnings by 5. To accomplish this, he will provide men who will divide the product into small packages and sell it on the streets. They'll split the profits and give some of the money to the hospital. Larry isn't thrilled with the idea. If he was in favor of free healthcare, he'd still be rotting in Beijing. He suggests that White give him $3 million up front and then another $500,000 after the deal. Frank asks for some time to think about it, and they part ways.
This conversation made me realize just how fucking crazy you really are.
Frank returns to the plaza, where the 3 robbers from the subway are already waiting for him. It's a nice addition to the team. However, he soon hears the news of Jimmy Jump's arrest and the witness. The bail is set at $1 million for each gang member. The boss suggests they take out a loan and pay off the bail, but the lawyers advise against taking that risk. Frank replies that in the meantime he'll talk to the big shots and arrange Bishop's transfer somewhere far away from New York. Jennifer replies that this isn't likely to work. The chief investigator has too much authority for such maneuvers. Frank is angry and threatens to finish off the detective with his own hands if the team doesn't get his guys out from behind bars. Jennifer is forced to obey and soon she completes the task. A black limousine meets Jump and his associates at the exit from the station. At the same moment, Bishop and his partners pull up to the building. Now it's the thugs' turn to taunt and gloat. Gilly reacts by spitting in Jimmy's face. The latter doesn't respond to the provocation.
Black man. Hey, some flowers for your witness.
Jennifer is the last one to get into the car, and the cops give the lawyer judgmental looks. They ask if she's happy with herself for helping such scoundrels. The girl refers them to the judge. She is acting within the law. Without wasting valuable time outside of jail, the gang heads straight for Chinatown. They crash into a crowd and open fire. Wong joins his men and engages in the shootout. This time, Frank also picks up an Uzi to exact revenge with his own hands, leaving a mountain of corpses behind. He and Jimmy catch up with the Chinese boss. Wong reveals where he hid the goods, but that doesn't save him from death. Then Frank uses his influence to organize a charity event. The famous singer Freddie Jackson helps to raise money for the hospital. He himself grew up in a disadvantaged neighborhood and understands the problems of poor people. The police officers watch this celebration of hypocrisy on TV. They sarcastically raise a toast to the King of New York, who has playfully outsmarted them. Gilly becomes disillusioned with the law and the concept of justice.
I thought the law accounted for something. But this whole system favors the scumbag.
The inebriated officers propose to take justice into their own hands. It wouldn't be hard to make Frank's murder look like a result of a gang war. Bishop disagrees and threatens to personally lock the guy up for such an idea. Gilly accuses him of aiding and abetting the criminals and promises to rid the city of mobsters by any means necessary. The young colleagues leave with the Irishman as a sign of their solidarity. In the meantime, Frank and his crew celebrate another success by having fun with Wong's loot. The boss goes out on the balcony with Jennifer to take a breath of fresh air. He says he's lost too much time in prison and wants to make up for it. The man hopes to do something good for the city while he still can. Bishop continues to act within the law and finds Frank's lawyer in a restaurant. He brings him pictures of the murdered Colombians and accuses him of being immoral. This has no effect. The man doesn't respond to pressure. D'Alessio shows up at yet another party of the gang. He brings with him a cartel boss from Los Angeles and his assistant. The men are interested in buying the Chinese product. The stranger promises to pay $6 million right away and another $6 later. Frank asks for the whole sum at once. The buyer departs, leaving his associate to check the quality of the goods. He and Melanie retire to an adjacent room, along with a mountain of the white substance. Meanwhile, D'Alessio and his new acquaintance go outside. Suddenly, he pulls out a silenced pistol and kills one of the guards. Frank's lawyer has been playing a double game. At this time, White and Ray go to have some alone time. They walk down the corridor and a hitman ambushes them. The girl gets in front of the boss, covering him from the machine gun fire with her body. Frank kills the assailant with a shot to the head. Behind the wall, Melanie also takes a bullet. White immediately avenges his friend and escapes. The assassins burst into the downstairs area and shoot the rest of the party guests. Jimmy is the only one who manages to survive and he returns fire. The gangster runs outside, where Frank is waiting for him behind the wheel of a limousine. A masked man leaps after him and clings to the car door. Jimmy rips the mask off him and sees a young cop underneath. At high speed, the guy hits his head on a fire hydrant on the side of the road and dies.
Nobody rides for free, mother.
Gilly and Flanagan are already chasing the gangsters in a car and notice their colleague's death. Together with several other cars, they rush forward with renewed zeal. The firefight continues on the move, and Jimmy shoots back through the sunroof. The chase moves to the Queensboro Bridge, where they try to push Frank off the road. The limo has better grip on the highway and overturns the pursuers instead. Gilly and Flanagan are the only ones left standing. They drive forward in the pouring rain, but see no sign of the fugitives. Suddenly, Jimmy in a limousine drives into them at high speed. Before the cops have a chance to react, he fires a clip at them and disappears into the night. The partners are lucky, and both of them survive. Gilly stays behind while Flanagan pursues the gangsters. Under the bridge, he challenges Jump to a duel. The criminal sneaks up behind Flanagan and shoots him. The wounded man grabs Jimmy and gets shot several more times at point-blank range. The gangster celebrates his victory, but at that moment Gilly shows up and takes him by surprise. Several bullets pierce through Jump's body. He collapses and begs to finish him off. The Irishman ignores the thug and runs to save his friend. CPR has no effect. Nothing more can be done, and Flanagan dies. Jimmy laughs like a maniac and gloats that he has killed a cop. Gilly finally kills him with a shot to the head. At the policeman's funeral, Bishop casts a stern look at his reckless subordinate. Gilly hears the cries of his friend's inconsolable relatives and is overwhelmed with emotion. He could not bear the weight of guilt and runs to his car. The policeman must take revenge and do it as soon as possible. As luck would have it, the car doesn't start, and the man loses his temper. Suddenly, a black limousine stops next to him. The window rolls down and a shotgun appears. Frank avenges his comrades in cold blood. The car accelerates as Bishop and the others run to the sound of gunfire. This is what happens when you try to take justice into your own hands. Frank arrives at an abandoned building where his henchmen are already torturing D'Alessio. The traitor tries to justify himself.
They were I had no reason to think they were cuss, man. Those motherfuckers set me up!
White doesn't believe any of this nonsense. He wants to know the lawyer's true motives and assumes that he was simply bought off. The man gives up and confesses everything. He was promised he'd be made rich and put into the witness protection program. That's how he wanted to get out of the illegal business. Since D'Alessio was carrying the money around, they got their hands on it too. Frank orders the scoundrel buried along with his dirty cash. The mobster walks away, and a gunshot rings behind him. He looks out at the evening lights of the New York City he's longed to conquer. The gangster has never been so alone. Late at night, Bishop returns home. To his surprise, Frank is already waiting for him inside. The gangster wants to talk straight and confesses to the murders. He talks about the murdered Artie Clay's fabulous fortune, which he had no intention of sharing with anyone. Wong renting out apartments to his fellow immigrants at triple the price. King Tito and the Colombians using underage girls in their business. White hated the scoundrels and despised their methods.
They're dead because they were running the city into the ground.
Bishop's not impressed. Does the criminal really think he's going to get away with murder? But Frank doesn't think he killed anyone who didn't deserve it. And for what he did, he served half his life in prison. The detective again points out that the thug had no right to judge others and carry out his own sentence. But White disagrees and believes he's doing the dirtiest job for the good of the community. The man is furious that his friends were killed for this, and there is a $50,000 bounty on his head. Well, then he himself will offer the hitman 5 times that amount for every cop involved in the investigation against him. Let the cops feel what it's like to be in his shoes. Always at gunpoint, afraid to leave the house without protection, Bishop isn't afraid of threats and is willing to play this game. White simply wants to control the illegal business. Frank parries. While he was in jail, the situation with addiction only got worse. People themselves want to see dealers on the street and spend $100 billion a year on such recreation.
I'm not your problem. I'm just a businessman.
Threatening him with a gun, Frank asks the detective to disarm and handcuff himself to a chair. The mobster then leaves in a hurry. Bishop immediately rushes to a drawer, takes out a spare pistol and shoots off the chain. Frank enters the subway and the detective follows him. He manages to jump into the car and follow him along the train. Trying not to frighten the passengers, Bishop finds Frank and slowly approaches him. The detective catches him off guard and demands that he surrender. White leaps up and takes a woman hostage. He politely asks her not to worry, but still doesn't remove the gun from the poor woman's face. His air of nobility is gone in a second.
I don't want to hurt you, but I will blow you away if I had to. You understand?
Yes, sir.
Bishop appeals to the criminal's honor and asks to settle the matter like men. In response, Frank points the gun at the detective and shoots him. Falling, the man manages to pull the trigger once, after which he loses consciousness and his heart stops. The train slows down at the station, and White nonchalantly leaves the car. He steps out onto the main street of Manhattan. The sidewalks of Times Square are packed with New Yorkers and tourists. The bright lights of billboards blind the eyes. Ambulance sirens drown in a cacophony of car horns and street noise. This chaos can easily give one a headache. Frank makes his way out of the crowd and into a cab, where he examines his wound for the first time. Bishop's bullet is deeply lodged in his abdomen. The police sirens grow louder, and Frank pulls out his gun. The driver dumps the car and runs away in fear. The cops block the street and surround the vehicle. Frank continues to watch in silence. He doesn't have the strength to get up. Finally, he can no longer stay conscious and passes out. Frank White dies, and his gun falls silently on his lap. Upon its release, the movie caused a major scandal. During the premiere at the New York Film Festival, many audience members left the auditorium, including the director Abel Ferrara's wife. The first question that was asked after the screening was, "This movie is an abomination. Why aren't you donating the proceeds to some kind of drug rehab program?" The next day during the film's second screening, actors Lawrence Fishburne and screenwriter Nicholas St. John were booed on stage. But in the end, the film found recognition and became a cult classic. Frank White's name appeared in many songs by the famous rapper The Notorious B.I.G. Later, Ferrara said that he had a script for a prequel dedicated to Frank White's rise to power, but in the end, the idea was not realized. In the scene in the cinema, the classic silent horror film Nosferatu: A Symphony of Horror is shown on the screen. There are other references to it throughout the movie. The basic plotline is similar, and Christopher Walken appears mostly at night, just like a vampire. The visual style and the use of light and shadows also evoke associations with the film. Speaking of vampires, Wesley Snipes was originally chosen for a much smaller role, and Detective Flanagan was played by another actor. However, the producers really liked him and convinced the man to switch roles with Wesley. This decision helped accelerate his career. Rumor has it that Snipes was forced to live in his car during filming. He eventually became the star of the vampire hunter movie, Blade. The Queensboro Bridge where the limo car chase takes place was closed to the public for 2 nights because of filming, and the woman Frank takes hostage on the subway had no prior acting experience, so her reaction to the gun was likely completely genuine. As always, you can find the title of the movie in the description of the video. In the meantime, let us know in the comments. Do you think society needs people like Frank White? Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and give this video a like so that more awesome stories come out as often as possible.